There was a question about 1.4 number 6. And so let's kind of work through this together and have a conversation on what's going on with it. So here's an example of number 6. It says, given that f of x is equal to x plus 4 and g of x is equal to the square root of x plus 5, determine the following. Write each answer using interval notation. And so then it asks for two parts. We're going to work on the first one. It says domain of f of g of x. So if you're looking for the domain of this function, what you have to do is first create the composition of the function and then think about the problems you're going to have with domain. And so when we're creating the composition of it, remember a couple of things. Remember that the first letter is going to be the template that you use to set up your equation. So that means I'm going to take this function here, f of x, and rewrite it as something plus 4. Then the next part, or next letter, is what you plug in. And so I'm going to take my g function here and plug it in everywhere I had a parentheses. So I'm going to say the square root of x plus 5. Now, this gives me, there really is not a lot of cleanup. It gives me x plus 5 plus 4. And so that right there is your f of g of x. Now, in order to state the domain, when you think about domains, you want to think about problem areas. Issues with domain are going to be division by 0, when you have a square root, because remember, square roots have to be positive. That goes back to knowing our parent functions. And so knowing that your square root has to be positive is what's going to come into play with this function. And so I'm going to look at this value here. I'm going to say everything underneath that square root, or in our case, x plus 5, has to be greater than or equal to 0. If it's not greater than or equal to 0, then we're going to end up with negatives under the square root. Your calculator doesn't like that. We go into the imaginary zone. So I'm going to solve this out. And that gives me x to be greater than or equal to negative 5. So that is going to be the x's I'm going to have to use in order to get my new equation I have, its domain. Now it says write it in interval notation. So that means x has to be greater than or equal to that negative 5. So that's going to be negative 5, comma, infinity. And that's going to be the final answer that you put into that blank. Now for the second part, what it's going to do is it asks for g of f of x. And so again, we're looking for the domain of it. So you're going to have to follow all the same steps first to create it and then to identify your domain. And so this is going to be your template. And this is going to be your plugin. And so first I'm going to start with my template. I'm going to take my g function, and it's the square root of something plus 5, and put my f function everywhere I have a parentheses, which is x plus 4. Then clean that up. Now in this case, we can actually add those two together, so that gives me the square root of x plus 9. So this is your new composed function between g composed with f. And again, it's a square root. And square roots only exist in that first quadrant. And so what we have to do is we have to say x plus 9 has to be greater than or equal to 0. Solve that out for x, and that gives me x greater than or equal to negative 9. Now that is inequality notation, so the interval for that is going to be from negative 9 to positive infinity. So again, with this one, it's two-part. You need to first write the compositions of them, simplify up as much as you can, and then 2, consider the domain. And so just our little side note here, when you're thinking about domain, this goes to previous discussions, when you have a square root, the inside part of that square root must be positive. So that's why we set up our inequalities here. And then you can't have division by 0. So if you have some kind of fraction, you want to check underneath here and make sure that the denominator does not equal 0. And you're really just, again, looking for those problem areas. And we can't find those problem areas until we see that we have the compositions of the two things. So I hope this helps with number 6, but please let me know if you need more explanation or information.